Ever since the start of the Boruto series, Kishimoto-sensei has wanted to see the usage of Kurama with the Byakugan. According to original art, this was supposed to be Boruto, but it looks like Kishimoto decided not to do that and is taking the series in a completely different direction. However, this concept is not dead, as we've seen that Himawari has taken the mantle of Nine-Tails Jinchuriki from her father and also possesses the Byakugan. But as I was reading the story, I began to wonder about this. What if Hinata had the Nine-Tails? Well, that's the story I want to tackle today, so grab some popcorn and a warm blanket and let's get into it. Welcome to the Amagi. Before we begin, only 25% of our viewers are subscribed, so if you're a fan of the video, please like and double check if you are subscribed, and with that out of the way, let's get into the video. As Kushina was rushed off to the secret location where she would have her baby, a single eye watched. This eye belonged to a man none other than Obito Uchiha, a ghost of the past. A man long thought dead, yet one who continued to survive. As he followed the group from afar, he kept his single Sharingan trained on them. As they reached the place where Kushina had been planned to give birth, they entered through the door and began making their descent. Obito stood and retconned the area. There were many guards posted about. There was one at every entrance. It was a good thing that Obito didn't plan to go in through the entrances. He came to the wall of the structure and looked around. It appeared to be an old bunker, built during one of the previous Shinobi World Wars. Reaching out, his hand touched the stone face. With a shift of his Sharingan, he awakened his Mangekyo and began to utilize the ability. He passed through the wall and into a hallway. Obito mused that he was the chosen successor of Madara, and would take on his mantle to continue his work. It was ironic because of Madara's title as the Ghost of the Uchiha, and Obito's ability allowed him to phase through solid matter as if he were the actual being referenced by the title Ghost. As Obito made it down the stairs, he kept to the shadows, eyes open and remaining vigilant, searching for anyone who might be walking by. Thankfully, he seemed to be in the clear. As he drew closer to the only room with light coming out of it, he heard a woman crying out. She was delivering a baby. Obito came to the door and slowly peeked around it. He heard the crying of the baby. This was the time. It was now or never. Obito pulled his kunai, ready to attack, but as he did, he couldn't help but notice Minato's face. As the child passed by him and headed toward Kushina, Obito saw the smile on both parents' faces. They looked so happy. Obito knew he had to take the Nine-Tails, and this was the perfect time. The seal had yet to be completely closed again, but no, Obito wouldn't. Not today, at least. Despite everything, Minato still was his mentor, and he couldn't help but want to see him happy. Today was a joyous and momentous occasion. He didn't wish to spoil it. So he turned around and began to leave, the same way he came in. As he exited the building, he made his way out. He then came into contact with Zetsu, who half expected him to have the Nine-Tails. "Well, did you get it?" Zetsu asked. Obito shook his head. "No, I didn't. It wasn't the opportune moment." "How was it not the opportune moment?" Zetsu asked. "She was giving birth, an action that weakens the seal and makes it possible to steal the tailed beast more easily." Obito shook his head. "There were too many guards nearby to kill them all, not to mention that the fourth Hokage was there. I chose to abort the mission." Zetsu didn't seem to buy it, not for a second, but he didn't press the matter. "Don't worry, Zetsu. The time will come when we take the Nine-Tails, and when we do, they'll be unable to stop us." Zetsu nodded. "As you wish." He began to sink down into the ground. Obito stood there a moment longer and looked back at the village he'd been born and raised into. A certain joy and happiness filled his heart as he looked over the village. It was bittersweet, but Obito shook the feeling and fled the area. For quite some time, Minato and Kushina were allowed to enjoy their new life with their child, but Zetsu began to believe that the reason that Obito didn't take the Nine-Tails was out of personal feelings. That being said, he decided to take matters into his own hands. Nearly a year afterward, as Zetsu tried to convince Obito to go and take the Nine-Tails, Obito refused. This left Zetsu in a predicament. The love that Obito had for Minato and Kushina was going to get in the way of the plans they had made, so someone had to solve the issue. Zetsu began to plot, and so he would sneak into the home of Kushina and Minato. He would sneak up behind Minato and would kill him before he ever even knew he was there. He would then seek out Kushina as well. Once he found her, he grabbed her and pulled her to a secret location where they couldn't easily be spotted. He chained her up. She looked at the mysterious man with horror and disgust. "What are you?" He offered a small smile. "I'm Zetsu, and I've come to take what's rightfully mine." "And what's that?" Kushina asked. Zetsu let out a chuckle that developed into a slight laugh. "Isn't it obvious? I want your tailed beast." Kushina shook her head. "You're an idiot." Zetsu raised a brow. How?" Kushina let off a smile. "Because Minato will be here any moment." Zetsu shook his head. "I'm certain he would have. That is, if he weren't already dead." Kushina's expression changed. "What do you mean?" she asked. Zetsu told her the honest truth. "When his back was turned, I stabbed him. He's dead right now, seeping into the carpet." To prove his point, Zetsu began to spin one of Minato's special kunai on his finger. Kushina's expression changed to hopelessness and then sorrow. This was perfect. The seal on the Nine-Tails weakened with heavy emotion. He needed to push it forward a little bit. He hadn't actually killed Naruto, but there was no reason why she couldn't believe that what he was saying was true. After all, he had proven that he killed Minato, and all he was doing was adding on to that with Naruto. Kushina, fearing that her family had all been killed, would suddenly begin to cry. The chakra of the Nine-Tails began to boil to the surface just as Zetsu wanted. The seal was weakened by her emotions. Zetsu would reach out and grab the seal and would begin to undo it, to bring the Nine-Tails out. She cried out as the beast was removed. It reformed in the village. Zetsu, having finished with her, turned to walk away. Kushina then spoke. You thought you won." Zetsu had to admit that he didn't expect her to still be alive, let alone talking. "In fact, I do. I do think I've won." Kushina smiled. "You will fail." She then died. Zetsu then began to follow the Nine-Tails around. "Obito has too large of a soft spot for Konoha," he said to himself as he weighed whether he was making the right choice or not by letting it roam free. "It will do us both good if this place ceases to exist. And without their precious Hokage, who will be able to stop us now? The destruction of the shinobi world's most powerful clans is at hand. Lay waste to this village, Nine-Tails. Destroy them." The Nine-Tails roared as it continued making its way through the village. Hiruzen, the former third Hokage, donned his battle armor and summoned the Monkey King Enma to his side. The monkey looked up at the towering behemoth and spoke. "Is that the Nine-Tails?" Hiruzen nodded. "Indeed it is." Enma then looked to Hiruzen. "What does this mean of Lady Kushina?" Hiruzen did not wish to think what it could mean, so he refused to answer. "We must push it back. It needs to be pushed out of the village." Hiruzen then began to lead the charge. He started setting up plans that would help push it back, and as he did, nobody realized that the Nine-Tails was under the control of somebody else. Standing atop its head was the physical embodiment of Kaguya's will, his appearance mimicking the yin-yang release used by her to create him. With a swipe of his hand, a wave of vines rose up, cracking like a whip, pushing back resistance. The Nine-Tails marched forward on its quest to destroy everything. In the Hyuga clan compound, Hiyashi Hyuga was currently getting outfitted with his own battleware as his brother Hizashi ran into the room. "My lord, the Nine-Tails has broken through our defenses with what can only be seen as wood release. The creature's being led by someone with the same powers as Hashirama Senju." Hiyashi looked back at his brother. "Does the third Hokage know this?" Hiyashi nodded. "Yes, but his forces are in disarray. Terror has caused shinobi to begin retreating." Hiyashi then found himself ready for battle. They stepped out into the night and walked to the gate. From here, one could see the towering giant lumbering in the night, lit up by only moonlight and the glow of fires raging below. The Nine-Tails had seen them as well, and was currently starting to make its way in the direction of the compound. "What do we do, brother?" Hizashi asked. Hiyashi looked over. "Take 2 squads. Your squad will keep the Nine-Tails' attention. Stall for time. Me and my squad will race to its back and make our way up. We'll deal with the mastermind. Hopefully doing that will be enough to stop the attack." Hizashi nodded. He would lead his squad to the base of the lumbering creature. Hiyashi would then take his own group and proceed to make his way around the back. Once they made their way behind the Nine-Tails, they began to climb its fur, making their way to the top where Zetsu stood. The appearance of this being was terrifying. Looking upon its visage sent shivers down their spines. "What are you?" Hiyashi asked. It looked back at him. "I'm your demise." The creature then rushed at them with incredible speed. The squad near Hiyashi moved to protect their clan head, but the wood release utilized by the creature tore through their bodies as if it were nothing at all. Each of the Hyuga clan members went down. Hiyashi knew that this was not a creature he could take lightly. He needed to be smart about this. As it circled him, he circled it, using his Byakugan to get a good look at the creature's inner workings, more specifically its chakra pathway system. As he did so, he found that this thing possessed more than 361 tenketsu, a number closer to 380, and some of them were in odd placement. It led Hiyashi to believe that he wasn't fighting a single being, but two. He waited for it to move. As it did, he would reach out and strike one of the tenketsu to get a good guess of its physical capabilities. As he struck it, he witnessed chakra from the other half rushing over to mend and reopen the tenketsu at incredible speeds. The gentle fist technique would be ineffective unless Hiyashi attacked both of them at the same time. As the beast drew closer to the compound, Hizashi found that he was unable to stop its advance. It no longer cared about his team and instead was simply going after the compound now. As it entered, it began to crush the surrounding buildings. The Hyuga were attempting to escape, but during this time, the beast tore into the clan head's home, where it found the infant Hinata laying in a crib, bawling her eyes out. Neji had seemingly rushed into the house to defend her like a little knight in shining armor, but surely he wouldn't expect that he would have to come face to face with the tailed beast. Terrified, he froze there by the crib. The Nine-Tails seemed interested in them and was about to reach out and take them. That was when Hizashi stepped between it and her. He was determined to protect his son and niece no matter what. Hiyashi was atop the beast's head facing Zetsu. It was then that he realized that he would need more speed. His clan's greatest technique was the 8 trigram 64 palms. The more skilled among them could actually double the speed to 128, but even that wouldn't be enough, Hiyashi thought. He needed more speed still. He called back to his training. Given that taijutsu was an important part of Hyuga training, he wanted to expand his taijutsu knowledge, and had at times called on Might Guy so he could experience a different discipline. With enough training and study, Might Guy managed to teach Hiyashi about the gates, which Hiyashi had always heard about but had never known. Though his training hadn't given him much in the way of strength, it did allow him access to the gates of opening, which would release all mental inhibitions, allowing him to access his physical body's full power. Opening this gate, he felt an increase of strength and speed. While it did threaten to make his gentle fist technique less gentle, Hiyashi managed to control. He remembered what it was that he opened it to do. With the gate opened, his speed had increased enough to allow him to double the 64 palms a second time. As soon as Zetsu stepped into his range, Hiyashi called out his Byakugan to look deeply into the creature's body and recognize the tenketsu. He then prioritized the tenketsu that were connected to important organs. He called out his new attack, 8 trigrams, 256 palms. He began striking the monster, his numbers going higher. 2 palms, 4 palms, 8 palms, 16 palms, 32 palms, 64 palms, 128 palms, 256 palms. He struck the tenketsu so fast that they didn't even have enough time to pop back open again. The tenketsu struck, Zetsu stood there for a moment, his face tweaking out as suddenly the two halves began to melt from each other, separating into 2 equally dead creatures. But even though Zetsu was dead, this didn't stop the Nine-Tails. In fact, it made it even more dangerous. Hiyashi, unable to hold on any longer, was tossed off and fell into one of the buildings on the compound. He was knocked unconscious. Hizashi, still guarding Hinata, knew that he couldn't beat the beast on his own. There was only one choice. He weaved his hand signs to utilize the Reaper Death Seal. Neji was confused as to what was happening. His father commanded the Shinigami to take the Nine-Tails' spirit out and seal it into Neji, but as the energy of the Nine-Tails passed into him, he knew that it wasn't going to work and that it would quickly overwhelm him. So he elected to have its spirit cut in half and sealed half into Neji with the other half into Hinata. It was then that Hizashi died. Neji was startled, watching the events transpire, and suddenly he felt a burning feeling enter his body, as well as the screams of a monster. He grabbed his head and fell to his knees. Hinata was crying loudly now. Neji sat there on his knees for a moment until he looked up at the body of his father. He began to slowly crawl towards it before passing out over it, and with that, a night filled with terror and fear faded to uneasy peace. An uneasy peace that would ultimately erupt into sorrow as the villagers began to mourn. Eventually, Hiyashi woke up and rushed to his house. There he found his baby girl crying. He lifted her up and began to check her over for wounds. He then noticed that on her tummy was a swirling seal. He looked down and saw Hizashi laying there dead. By his father's side was Neji, who also was sporting the same kind of seal on his stomach. Had Hizashi really utilized the Reaper Death Seal to seal the Nine-Tails away? He pulled his daughter in close for a hug. "Oh, Hinata, I'm so glad you're okay." Hiyashi then knelt down and lifted up Neji into his arms. Looking at Hizashi's body, he spoke. "I will take care of your son, Hizashi. I promise you." Elsewhere, in the midst of the aftermath of the battle, Hiruzen and a small squad went out as a search and rescue for the 4th Hokage. They found the house was mostly intact with only a few structural issues due to the attack. Entering in, they searched for Minato and Kushina, but no doubt they had already been killed. If they were alive, the Nine-Tails wouldn't have attacked. And if it had, Minato would have been there to stop it. But he wasn't. Skulking through the home, they then discovered Minato's body, but not the body of Kushina, hinting that she was likely killed somewhere else. Looking over the body, they found different types of wounds on Minato. Given that he was far enough away from the battle, chances were he was killed before it even started. As they looked around though, they heard crying. Hiruzen entered a bedroom to see a crib. Within it was the baby, Naruto. Hiruzen lifted it up. "Don't worry, we're going to take good care of you." If you know Hiruzen, you know what that means. "We'll shut you up in an apartment of your own the moment we wean you off of milk." As time passed, the children began to grow. Hinata and Neji were slowly being trained in the art of the gentle fist technique, and every so often they would attempt to train them to utilize their Nine-Tails abilities. This was a lot harder to do than it seemed. As it turned out, Konoha had never particularly trained their Jinchuriki to utilize their tailed beast as a weapon, not the same way that other nations had. Instead, the village had simply used their Jinchuriki as a prison for the tailed beasts. But the Hyuga didn't like that. They believed that the Nine-Tails was meant to be a weapon for them and should be used accordingly. The issue with this, however, was that nobody had the proper knowledge to teach, and they were simply forging ahead on their own. Hiyashi had petitioned Hiruzen to give them everything they knew about controlling tailed beasts, and to their vexation, there wasn't all that much to know. Hiruzen gave them a few scrolls with information pilfered from other villages, but that wasn't enough to really help. Hiruzen did, however, decide to send Jiraiya a message to ask him about it, to which Jiraiya had some information that could help. So Jiraiya wrote down everything he knew about training and controlling tailed beasts into a set of scrolls that he sent back to Konoha. These scrolls were then given to the Hyuga for review. The Hyuga went over it all and began attempting to train them. Neji seemed to have an easier time with it than Hinata, with Hinata seemingly losing control quite often. There were even times when she would lose control out of the blue. It seemed like she just didn't have the mental fortitude to deal with the Nine-Tails. And due to this, like Neji, they decided that it was best to give her the curse mark of the caged bird. While it was highly unusual for members of the main branch, especially heirs, to possess this curse mark, Hiyashi believed that it was best as it allowed them to protect Hinata from herself, as the moment she lost control of her powers, they could activate the mark and cause her to pass out with just a not-so-gentle nudge. Due to her being slightly self-conscious about the curse mark, she elected to grow out her bangs to cover the mark. Neji would also cover his, albeit with a different method. While neither of them liked the mark, they did understand its importance. Neither of them complained. As more time passed, they would eventually join the Konoha Academy, where they would train to become skilled shinobi. While there, both of them proved to be incredibly intelligent, capable of understanding, gaining, and retaining information as it was presented to them. Neji always tended to score higher though, as he was more astute and was clearly gifted. Despite all of this, the villagers tended not to give a care for Hinata and Neji, being bitter about the tailed beast they contained, and being bitter at them by association. They didn't tend to get physical with Hinata and Neji, but on occasions it did get verbal, which tended to cause Neji to become quite defensive for Hinata's sake. He would threaten all those who dared speak against her. And while she was safe, the emotional toll was still hard on her and left her quite sad, depressed, and oftentimes not really in the mood to leave the compound. All the same, she had to. At school, they continued to bully her, but whenever Neji was present, they stayed away, knowing that Neji would open a fresh can of gentle fist on them if they dared to say anything offensive. But on one particular day, Neji couldn't go to school after having caught the flu. Hinata wanted to stay behind, but her father told her that while Neji was sick, this didn't give her an excuse to skip, as she was not sick, so she had to go. The next day, it was snowing outside and viciously cold. She worried for Neji, as the cold outside no doubt would leave him shivering, but she trusted her household enough to deal with it, as she herself had been sick in the past and had always gotten better. As she made her way through the snow, though, she was spotted by a few bullies. They looked around and noticed that Neji was nowhere to be seen. They went after her and began to pick on her, particularly for the oddness of her eyes. They made her upset. As she began to cry, she reached into her pocket. "What are you looking for, a handkerchief?" To their surprise, she pulled out a pencil and paper. "What's that for?" they asked. She began writing their names down. Butch, Gus, and Daryl. "Hey, I asked you a question," the bully, apparently named Butch, shouted. She looked up. "Neji told me to keep a tab of bullies for him to beat when he gets better." Butch pulled the notepad away from her and threw it into the snow. They lifted her up by the collar. "You better be careful, fish eyes. I ain't afraid to hit a girl." "Hey, take your hands off of her," another voice shouted. Running over like a flash, Naruto appeared, his fist reared back before being punched into his face. Naruto stood there as Hinata fell to her knees, having been let go by the now rolling Butch. It didn't take Butch long to get up. He, Gus, and Daryl all began to take out their frustrations on Naruto. Hinata was in awe. There was no way Naruto didn't know it would end like this, but he defended her anyway. She was surprised. They beat him to a bloody pulp and then took the muffler he had and proceeded to shred it out of nothing but anger and spite. After they'd finished, they spat in his direction, turned around, and began to walk away. Hinata walked on over and helped Naruto up. "Are you okay?" He then pulled out a notepad. "Butch, Gus, Daryl." He then handed the notepad over to her. "There, so you can remember." She took it. Naruto tried to smile through his swollen face. He looked for his muffler and then looked over and noticed that it had been shredded. He seemed disappointed by this. Hinata helped him up. Naruto thanked her, to which she returned the thanks, telling him that he was the one who helped her. He scratched the back of his head and simply said that nobody should be treated the way that people treat her, and was sure to let her know that he thought she had beautiful eyes and they weren't creepy at all. Well, he might have been lying to her about that last part, but his kindness was appreciated. He turned and began to walk away. As he did, Hinata looked over at the ruined muffler and picked it up in her hands. She would proceed to tuck it away into her backpack. She'd make her way to school, where she found herself more and more preoccupied with Naruto. As he sat there, she couldn't take her eyes off him. He left her heart beating quickly. She didn't understand what this meant, but part of her began to wonder if it were love. Getting home, she was sure to tell Neji all about it, how she'd been bullied by Butch, Gus, and Daryl. He took the note and pinned it to the wall. "That'll help me get better sooner. I'll have some butts to look forward to kicking." What did they do? She told him about how they called her fish eyes, threatened to hit her, beat up Naruto, and then ruined Naruto's muffler. Neji was sure to write that down. "Now I've got something to boil on. Thanks." She then began to talk about Naruto. "When those 3 boys were being mean to me, Naruto showed up and protected me. He punched Butch. They then all ran over and ganged up on him and beat him until he bruised and bled. They destroyed his scarf, but he was so nice. Even after that, he was nice enough to tell me that my eyes weren't creepy and that they were actually pretty. Then, well, I can't explain it, but I got excited. I can't stop thinking about him." Neji listened to her. "Sounds like a crush." "A crush?" she asked. He nodded. "A crush is what happens when you begin to develop an interest in someone romantically. It starts off as excitement and a desire to be good friends with someone. You get excited about being around them. It's the seedlings of love, but it doesn't always become love. It can become love, or it might go away after a while. All you can really do is wait." "How long?" Hinata asked. Neji thought about it. "Quite a while. I wouldn't say you're old enough to really even consider dating right now, but that means you have plenty of time to figure it out. Don't stress over it though. If it becomes something, then chase after it, and if it goes away, it wasn't meant to be. Either way, you'll be happier for it in the long run." Hinata nodded. "Is there anything I can get you, Neji? Something to drink? Maybe another blanket?" Neji smiled. "That's quite all right, Lady Hinata. I'm fine. I think I could use some rest though, if you don't mind." She stood. "Of course. Sleep well, Cousin Neji." She walked out of the room and closed the door behind her. After supper, she got herself ready to sleep and proceeded to pass out thinking about all the things Neji had told her. As the days came and went, Neji and Hinata continued their studies. Neji got payback on Butch, Gus, and Daryl, and things returned to normal. The feelings Hinata felt for Naruto, though, only grew as the months passed them by. Eventually, years passed by. The Uchiha fell, which was a tragedy for everyone. But it was most tragic for Sasuke Uchiha, the only survivor, who had to live with the guilt of knowing that it was his own brother that did this. It was painful to see his once happy smile now turn into a sullen stare that rarely seemed to be looking toward the blackboard. He seemed to have his whole soul consumed with the desire for vengeance. It was tragic, but it eventually pushed him to become better, and led to a new rival for Neji, who found Sasuke a genius of equal power. Hinata tended to try and keep her distance from Naruto, but to be honest, she couldn't help but stare. This wasn't something flying under the radar to the rest of the class. To be frank, it seemed that the only person who didn't know Hinata had a thing for Naruto was Naruto himself. As she continued staring, she'd one day be surrounded by Ino and Sakura. "So, you like Naruto, huh?" Hinata's face turned blood red. "No, nothing of the sort." Sakura and Ino laughed. Ino then spoke. "There's no use hiding it, that blush just gave it away. And not to mention that you spend more time staring at Naruto than you do at the chalkboard," Sakura said. "It's obvious you have a thing for him." Hinata looked down in embarrassment. Sakura continued. "There's no need to be embarrassed. Everyone feels like this eventually, it's natural." Ino then cut in. Though I must admit that I've never seen a girl choose Naruto as a love interest. Usually that's Sasuke. Sakura then repeated it as well. Sasuke. It suddenly became very awkward. The two girls cut away from their fantasies and readdressed Hinata. Frankly, I think you should say something to Naruto. If you care for him, you should let him know. Hinata looked away. I don't think that's a good idea. Ino nudged her shoulder. Nah, it's a great idea. Why are you so scared? Are you afraid he'll say no? I mean, I don't really think the market looks great for Naruto. If you like him, then you should just come out and tell him so. Hinata hid her face in her hands. Ino and Sakura sighed. Well, girl, if you ever need help picking up your man, let us know, Ino told her. They then walked off. To be honest, Hinata didn't think she had the mental fortitude to tell him. She just didn't have the guts. It wasn't that she was afraid that he would say no, it's just she just couldn't do it. She couldn't explain why. Every time she tried to talk to him, her throat felt like it would close up and she got lightheaded, so she decided to let it go. Any future she might have with him was nothing more than a dream, a fantasy. She would try to forget about it. Eventually, the time came for graduation though, and she and Neji both passed with flying colors. They'd be told to wait in a room for their jonin. As they did, it didn't take long for them to realize that they'd both been added to the same team. As they waited for their third member, Hinata almost panicked. Naruto? He waved. Oh, hi Hinata. Hi Neji. What are you guys doing here? We're here to join a team. What do you think we're doing here? Naruto laughed. Me too. He walked over and sat next to Hinata. He looked at her with a smile. Looks like we're gonna be on the same team. Hinata could hardly move, could hardly even breathe. Neji looked over at him and her and shook his head with a grin. This is gonna be one hell of a team. It didn't take much longer for Kakashi to enter the room. Alrighty team, let's... He blinked a couple times. Hinata, why are you so flushed? And that's where I'm gonna call it for the day. To be honest, I only really needed to give Hinata the Nine-Tails, but right there at the end I felt it was important for me to give Neji one too. I wanted to add some character development, and right there toward the end, I decided to swap Sasuke and Sakura out for Neji and Hinata on Team 7. I surmised that this would be because Kakashi's Sharingan would be the only thing that could stop the Nine-Tails if it escaped, but also because Naruto is the son of Minato and it just seemed right that they all be on the same team together. This also leads to an increase of romantic friction between Naruto and Hinata, which I'm excited to explore in the future. But what did you think? Leave a comment below and tell us what you thought of the episode or what you might like to see in the future. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell to be notified when more videos like this one drop, and feel free to click one of these videos on the screen for more thrills like this one. Anyway, until next time, peace out.